Light is a powerful tool. Hey folks, John Peterson here, and if you're watching this video, my assumption is you are into photography and you know how important light is to our photographs. It's really the whole essence of what we capture on our camera sensors is light, is photons. And the difference between lights and darks helps us craft a artistic, wonderful composition. Now, as you progress in your photography, hopefully your understanding of light, how it interacts with subjects, how it interacts with the landscapes, the quality of light, the temperature of light, the direction of light, all of those things are massively important for us as working photographers out in the field. Now, one of the things, because I'm a professional and I do this full time, I look at thousands of images, both my own as well as my clients. And, the importance of light in a good composition is paramount. And there's things that we can do as photographers to use light to help us create an even better composition, to take our photographs from good to great. And part of that is using light and tonality to direct the viewer's eyes to where we want them to look. Now, we know through scientific research that our eyes and our brain are attracted to the brightest part of an image. We naturally look at the brightest part of a photograph. So when I'm out composing photographs in the field, I pay attention to where is the brightest part of the photograph. And if the brightest part is where I want people to look, that's great. But if the brightest part is somewhere else in the photograph, kind of away from my subject or away from my story, that's not that great. And it's something that I might need to address either through changing my composition, putting on a different lens, moving my feet, or making some adjustments in post-processing to help shift the balance of light and direct folks to look at what I want them to look at. Now we use light to help people, to guide people through our scenes. We use shadows to keep people away from certain areas. There's lots of things that we can do with light. So let's jump in and take a look at a few image examples and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So as I said in the introduction, light is the essence of a photograph, and we can use light to direct the viewer's eyes. Now, I want to show you a couple of examples of things that I have done to subtly adjust a photograph to adjust the viewer's eyes. Now, in a photograph such as this, right, the brightest part of the image is back here at the sun, obvious. And that's where our attention and our eyes naturally go to. But I didn't want people to bypass this crack in the rocks. And yes, there's sea foam in it, and yes, the shape lends itself to be a leading line, but I spent a considerable amount of work to brighten up this area in a natural way so it grabs people's attention when they first come into the scene. I want them to start here and follow this trail both by shape and by tonality out to the brightest part of an image. Same thing holds true here, right? I've got the shape in the composition naturally leads you towards the back of the frame, which is what I want people to do, follow this footpath. But notice how bright it is back here, and this was done on purpose. As I wanted to keep this area very bright so people wouldn't be afraid to follow the path into the unknown at the back of the photograph. And I really spent a lot of time working on how dark these shadow areas are in contrast to this light. I didn't want it to be too much of a contrast where it would be an abrupt transition and not feel good, but I wanted it to be dark enough where this light area really stood out in the photograph. Similarly, of course, we have water motion and we have the bright white water that acts as a leading line, and a large part of why it acts as a leading line in a photograph is because of the tonality. Again, this is shot down on the Oregon coast. The sky, when I first shot this in the raw photo, the sky was the brightest part of the image. What did I do? I knocked down the sky's exposure a little bit, and then I spent a lot of time working on this little pathway leading up to the tree. The tree is the subject, but this pathway is the way to get to the subject visually. So I made sure that that path was bright. Now here's an example of the Sonoran Desert, and I knew that the direct sunlight would be hitting these cactuses or cacti and being the brightest part of the image, create these cactus to be the brightest part of the image. So working on composition of where I put these bright stalks of the cactuses in the image was critically important. This cactus is of course most important, but it's not bullseyed in the center of the frame, it's just a little bit off center. But I knew that the light on these cactuses would or could be potentially overriding all the rest of the scene. Likewise, really bright sunset, but the subject of this shot is this flat rock, and I wanted people to see this flat rock. So I spent a lot of time, again, brightening up this foreground and making sure that the surface of the rock was not too dark, so people would pay attention to this rock before they went off to the brightest part of the image in the background. Likewise, a little subtlety of lights and darks. Notice the border around this frame. Yes, I did put a vignette on it, but also I worked a lot on little dabs of light here and there towards the back of the scene in the middle of the photograph to draw people into the forest deeper into my photograph. Very selective lighting example where I wanted people to stay right here. If you looked at the raw file for this photograph, there was a lot more information and texture here in the foreground and more information here on this third hillside. I worked to darken those so that this was one of the brighter parts of the image, and everybody stayed right there because that was the subject of this photograph. What's the brightest part of the image here? Well, tonally, the grass or the wheat and the sky are almost the same. So it's almost a mirror image where I don't have one overriding another. So in this way, I have a very tonally balanced photograph, and there is no one brightest part of the image. The brightest parts are scattered throughout the image, so it invites people to travel around the photograph as they see fit. Now here's an image I just processed, and when I've had this image for several years now, and when it came up in years past, I've never bothered to process it, and I'll show you why. This was shot in Iceland during a winter workshop that I was leading. And this is down at Jökulsárlón, the iceberg lagoon. And the wind was blowing about 40 to 50 miles an hour. It was kind of I don't want to say miserable, but it was a challenging photographic session. So here's one of the photographs. And I wanted to highlight these ice chunks in the foreground, jumble in the midground, and the mountains in the background. And here's what the raw file looks like. Now, I don't like this raw file at all. Nothing in it grabs me. Why? Well, the first thing, and the thing that caught my attention today when I started processing this, where is the brightest part of the image? The brightest part of the image is way back here on these snow-covered mountains. Is that where I want people to look? No. The subject of the photograph is right down here with these two icebergs. So I spent a lot of time both in Lightroom and Photoshop managing the tonality across this image to try to shift people's view from the background to the foreground. And here's where I ended up. Look at that. I knocked down the sky a little bit, and I really brought up the foreground and really brought up the two icebergs or the chunks of ice right in the immediate foreground, which was the impetus for why I shot this photograph. So let's go back to the original, and there's the finished version. Original, finished version. You see, if you sort of abstract your eyes a little bit, you see how your focus shifts from the background to the foreground as I travel between these two images. And that's all because of light. Well, I hope you got a little understanding of what I'm talking about with how powerful light can be to direct the viewer's eyes to where we want them to go in the scene, as well as how we want them to feel about the photograph. So if you like this video and you're not subscribed to my channel, please feel free to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, tickle the bell, do all that kind of good stuff. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. I'm always happy to answer any questions or comments that you might have about this video or photography in general. All right, folks, thanks for watching and have a super day. Bye-bye.